Foreign policy advisor to President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign has now confirmed to NBC News that the unsealed confession of another Trump advisor claimed that the president and now Attorney General Jeff Sessions were told in early 2016 about the advisor's foreign connections and hoped to arrange a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Court records show frequent discussions in 2016 between suspected Russian agents and George Papadopoulos, a Trump national security member, who pled guilty to misleading investigations probing foreign meddling in the election. One section says that on March 31st, 2016, Papadopoulos attended a national security meeting in Washington, D.C. with then candidate Trump, then Senator Sessions, and other advisors, and that when Papadopoulos introduced himself to the group, he stated he had connections that could help arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin. Now, J.D. Gordon, a former Pentagon spokesman who also was a Trump advisor in that meeting, sitting between Sessions and Papadopoulos, first told the New York Times that he remembers the offer and what was said. Gordon said Papadopoulos, quote, went into the pitch right away. He said he had a friend in London, the Russian ambassador, who could help set up a meeting with Putin. The Times reports Trump listened with interest, and Gordon recalled Sessions opposing the idea, telling them that no one should talk about it because Sessions thought it was a bad idea that he did not want associated with the campaign. White House Special Counsel Ty Cobb responded to the Times, reporting this way, quote, the media's willingness to inflate Papadopoulos, a young, unpaid volunteer and supposed energy expert, into an important thought leader in the campaign or Russian operative is ludicrous. The evidence so far suggests he attended one meeting, said something about Russia, and was immediately shut down by everyone in the room. It's very important to remember he is not a criminal now because of anything he did for the campaign. He is a criminal because he initially lied to the FBI. So the argument here, the defense, Joe, is that, yes, Papadopoulos mentioned a Russia connection, but it was shut down immediately. Nothing else was made of it. The problem is those clips we played at the top of the show saying Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions saying, we never heard of any Russia connection on our campaign.
Right, exactly. And Ty Cobb can say all he wants to about how insignificant he was, but it is the president's own words that damns his lawyer's case against him. It's the president's own words that will follow him around. It's the president's own elevation, Michael Schmidt, of this unknown young staffer, as Ty Cobb would have us say, where he goes into the Washington Post. This was one of his first, if not his first, significant editorial page meeting, and he was asked about his foreign policy team. And that was the second name that he discussed and talked about what a bright man, a young man he was, and he was an expert, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sorry, it's just like Manafort, who they claim now really wasn't that connected with the campaign when they were all saying in the summer of 2016 he was the man who would put them over the top at the convention. All of them said it. And it's the same thing with Cambridge Analytica. Oh, no, they really didn't do anything. In the summer of 2016, they were telling the press and they were telling all of their money people. No, Cambridge Analytica, they're the people that are going to tell us where all the votes are in states like Michigan, North Carolina and Florida. Now they're trying to do it to a staffer that Donald Trump said was one of his most important.
They try and portray this as, look, we needed to have some sort of foreign policy team to make the argument to Republicans that we were going to be serious about this issue. A lot of folks didn't want to be associated with us. We threw this group together very quickly. We brought them in front of the president. It was basically a photo op. I don't even know how many, there wasn't even that many photos to it, but it was a way of showing it. And no one really took it that seriously. So to hold Donald Trump accountable for what he said many months later, White House officials would argue, is just not fair. This was one passing thing in a meeting, and how could he have remembered it?
Yeah, but maybe one of the ways they could remember it, Caddy K, is they took a picture of it and sent it around on campaign stationery, and it was probably one of the few foreign policy meetings he had at that point. And you have Jeff Sessions, who was in the meeting, and he's two people away from a man who had contacts with the Russians and was trying to set up a meeting. Did Jeff Sessions just get caught lying to Congress again?
Well, Jeff Sessions' role in all of this is interesting because he says he doesn't remember it, but he also says very clearly he's the one by this account in this meeting, who's the one that pours cold water on this idea and says, actually, this campaign should have nothing to do with the Russians. He doesn't like this as a strategy. He doesn't like this outreach going on. So the fact that he did that, you would think he would be very clear about, because it was something he objected to. I think it is possible the president didn't remember that particular meeting, but then the president has to be learned to be a lot more careful about his subsequent language, right? He can't say, no, those meetings categorically didn't happen. No, there were no contacts between my campaign. All he could have really said, honestly, is, I don't remember that there were any. That would have been a more accurate accounting of it.
This, in addition to the report about Papadopoulos, another Trump National Security Team member, Carter Page, told NBC News he informed Jeff Sessions he was headed for Russia in June of 2016. In an email, Page says, quote, I mentioned in passing that I happen to be planning to give a speech at a university in Moscow, completely unrelated to my limited volunteer role with the campaign. So that means Sessions was told about two different campaign officials contacting or attempting to contact Russian officials. This only adds to Sessions' own meetings with Russian Ambassador Kislyak in April, July, and September, which he initially was unable to recall, and all seemingly in contrast with his sworn testimony in January, June, and October of this year.
If there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I not have communications with the Russians. I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials concerning any type of interference with any campaign or election in the United States. Further, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign.
You don't believe that surrogates from the Trump campaign had communications with the Russians. Is that what you're saying?
I did not, and I'm not aware of anyone else that did.
So, John Heilemann, obviously this flies in the face of the reporting we have this morning that he was in a meeting seated a few chairs away from George Papadopoulos, who introduced the idea of setting up a meeting with Putin. Sessions, according to the reporting, shut down that idea, but he was aware of Russian contacts within the campaign.
There are two related problems. One is a large problem and the other is a larger problem. The large problem is that Sessions has now, to Joe's question earlier, has now repeatedly lied under oath to Congress. He's had to clean up his lies on two occasions, and now his former colleagues in the United States Senate want to have him come back. They're already sending him letters last night saying, you got to come back up here because you clearly have been misleading the Congress under oath. So that's one problem. But the second problem, the larger problem, is that this is in the biggest context here is that everybody related to the Trump campaign, when they're asked about Russia, lies about it, and they're found out later. Their immediate instinct throughout has been to dissemble in public statements under oath to the press. From the time that Donald Trump took office, every question, every time this comes up, no one is straightforward about their role, whether their role is innocent or whether their role might have some nefarious overtones to it. When everybody lies about something consistently over and over again, this is the heart of the problem for them politically and legally, because it just calls a huge amount of attention and draws a lot of suspicion of the fact that no one seems to be able to tell the truth in a consistent way about this issue.
Even if it was totally not.
And Donnie,
Yes.
this is something that we've been talking about for quite some time. I mean, I think we had this conversation 6 months ago, asking the question, why is it every time somebody in the Trump team talks about Russia, they lie? And here you have Donald Trump saying, I wrote the date down, on February 16th, 2017, that nobody had any contact with anybody in Russia other than Flynn, who only got caught after he was lying because his communications were intercepted. They had lied about that beforehand. But you have all of these meetings. You have Donald Trump finding out that Papadopoulos had actually was trying to set up a meeting because he had contact with the Russians. And then you have, of course, the Don Jr. meeting on June the 9th that Donald Trump certainly knew about, where everybody, Manafort, everybody was piled in there to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. And you have, again, then the president is lying when everybody finds out about that. He is the guy that orchestrates it on Air Force One to lie about the purpose of the meeting, which he lied and said it was about adoption. Of course, it was about, again, getting intel on Hillary Clinton from our enemies, the Russians. So, Donnie, a prosecutor is not going to get somebody thrown in jail because they're lying to the press, but it shows intent. And prosecutors do look at public statements that are lies, that are meant to deceive the press and move prosecutors off the trail. This looks bad. And there's a timeline I wrote in the Washington Post this morning. There's a timeline that when you stack up all of these dates of just what we know, it's looking, let's just say, any self-aware president would be very concerned right now about federal charges.
Well, you're talking about, you guys are talking about a timeline of the last year. Let's talk about a timeline of the last 25 years. That, we know Donald Trump went bankrupt in the early 90s. We know U.S. banks stopped lending him money. We know he kept getting money. We know his kids kept saying the money is pouring in from Russia. Those are exact quotes from Don Trump Jr. We know that the Russians, through Facebook and 126 million impressions to the U.S., were doing everything possible to get this president elected. We know this president has never still, almost a year in office, has said one negative word against our geopolitical enemy, a dictator, for lack of a better word, named Vladimir Putin, where he basically said bad words about everybody else on this walking planet. So you come back to the simple fact now, as all these little nuggets are coming, and there will be many more coming to fruition, that Donald Trump has been owned by the Russians because of money. Follow the money. It's that simple. These are now little pieces that are falling in place, and there is a big, big story that will happen in the coming months about Russian money laundering. It goes back to Trump Tower. There's so many specific instances. This is what this is all about.
And that's the thing that Bob Mueller is looking into. He'll look at the money as well. Casey Hunt, I want to ask you about this guy, J.D. Gordon, the campaign advisor who was in the meeting, quoted by Mike Schmidt and his colleagues in the New York Times, talking about Papadopoulos again, saying Papadopoulos went into the pitch right away. He said he had a friend in London, the Russian ambassador, who could set up a meeting with Putin. I understand you actually spoke to Mr. Gordon this morning.
Yeah, I've worked with J.D. Gordon for a long time. He's been in foreign policy circles and around presidential politics for several cycles. And so I reached out to him to try and confirm his account to the New York Times, which he did. He was very kind of emphatic in saying that, look, when this came up, this is something that Jeff Sessions immediately dismissed and said, this is not something that we want to talk about. I do think, to echo what several around the table have already pointed out, there seem to be very sudden and somewhat differing accounts of exactly what type of advisors either one of these were. We're also expanding this conversation around Carter Page. Suddenly people that at the time of the events seem to play one role, but now in retrospect, people are arguing that they played different roles. And the overall theme here seems to be that the special counsel, Mr. Mueller, has a remarkable capacity to jog people's memories. So we'll see if that trend holds.
Steve, it was interesting. You look at Ty Cobb, the White House attorney's response to this statement. He, again, tries to discredit Papadopoulos, a young, unpaid volunteer and supposed energy expert. The way we learned that he was a, quote, energy expert was from Donald Trump in the Washington Post editorial board meeting. That was a quote he used, and a lot of people said, he's an energy expert? We didn't realize that. That was Donald Trump's word.
And he said something like he was a fine young man. So, they're
excellent guy.
Excellent guy. So they're obviously playing that game. I would just add one thing, I think, to what John and Casey may have been alluding to. So you certainly seem to have not telling the truth. You may have problems with the money and where the money went. But the other thing you have here is just basic incompetence, in the sense that they are violating a basic rule of any investigation, which is the first thing you should do is find out everything yourself and get it out there at once, so that you're not having this drip, drip, drip where some prosecutor is finding a guy who says this happened after somebody else said it didn't happen. And they don't seem to have any control of the facts or of the story. They don't even seem to know what happened. And again, it would be the first rule of any investigation, anytime you're the target of something, which is to know everything and get it out there in a clean way so that you have some credibility with the public, and they don't seem to have any interest in doing that.
Or they know the facts, Kathy, and they want to cloud the facts, which is what they've done.
That's interesting, because if you look at the language that Trump and Sessions used, Sessions in those two clips that we played said, I do not believe there were contacts, I'm not aware there were contacts. I don't know if that's a deliberate, if he'd spoken to his lawyer beforehand and had got deliberate legal language, but, Trump clearly saying something much more blunt. There were no contacts.
Well, Sessions is a lawyer and Trump isn't, so
that,
maybe
that
that's
may be the difference. So, Mike, where does this go now? What happened in terms of the Papadopoulos stuff, in terms of the Sessions stuff, that meeting? What's Mueller looking at around this now? What's the next step, do you think?
Well, for better or worse, it's not against the law to lie to the press. But what Mueller is trying to figure out is why on the flight back from Europe over the summer, Trump was so involved in trying to provide a misleading initial statement to the New York Times about the Trump Tower meetings. That's something that, Mueller's really trying to figure out and is really focused on, which is interesting because it doesn't really include a lie under oath or a lie to Congress or anything like that. The other thing that's interesting about what the president's statements were in February was that it came at a very crucial time in the administration. Flynn had just resigned 3 days earlier. We now know that the day after that, February 14th, Trump goes to Comey, asks him to move past the Flynn investigation. So then that brings us up to the 16th of February, where he makes those comments at the press conference and tries as hard as he can to tamp down the Russia story. So it's a series of events that Mueller's looking at that he's trying to understand as much as we are.
And Willie, again, you look at what the Trump White House is saying this morning, what the lawyers are saying to try to get this behind them, and you can see a trend, and it is so obvious that nobody can be fooled by the fact that Papadopoulos went from being his key foreign policy advisor, one of his 2 or 3 key foreign policy advisors in the summer of 2016, according to Donald Trump, to the Washington Post editorial board, to being a nobody now that he was put under arrest. Manafort went from being the one man in Washington, D.C. that could get them over the top at the Republican National Convention. They all said that throughout the campaign. Said Corey Lewandowski wasn't up to the task. He just wasn't smart enough to do it. They had to bring in Paul Manafort. He was this genius at getting delegates. Then suddenly Manafort gets in trouble, and he's a nobody. And as I said before, they're doing the same thing with Cambridge Analytica. They were using Cambridge Analytica, saying to all of their donors and all of the media, you guys don't understand. We're going to have the best turnout operation in history, and we're going to have the best turnout operation in history because we're working with Cambridge Analytica, and they're the best of the best. They would sort of whisper it to you. Hey, don't tell anybody. Right. But this is what we're doing. They can't have it both ways, and they can't minimize Papadopoulos. They can't minimize Manafort, and they can't minimize Cambridge. Even though they're going to try every day, they obviously have gotten connected. So anyway, that's a fascinating discussion, and we still have, of course, coming up Donna Brazil too, and those bombshell revelations about the DNC.
Yeah, and one other thing to point out, Michael Schmidt and his colleagues reporting this morning have reopened these questions now about what Jeff Sessions said before the Senate. You have Democratic senators coming out now, Senator Leahy, Senator Blumenthal among them, who said, we were going to bring Jeff Sessions back in front of the Judiciary Committee and ask him, Mr. Leahy said, why he can't tell the truth, why he can't provide truthful testimony. So we'll be watching that too. Michael Schmidt, thank you very much. Great reporting. Still ahead on Morning Joe. President Trump laments being unable to involve himself with the Justice Department and the FBI. In his own words, quote, I'm not supposed to be doing the kinds of things that I would love to be doing, and I am very frustrated by it. We'll explain that. Plus, one of the key architects of the Republican tax plan, House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady joins us, plus the head of the House Freedom Caucus, Congressman Mark Meadows.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.